Sometimes you create a killer melody or a dramatic drum line, and then as soon as you start to pile stuff on, it just gets buried. In these cases, we need to pause for a moment and take a look at what we're doing and see how we can strengthen these lines to better cut through the mix. Hey, my name is Steve, composer, engineer, and lecturer, and welcome back to the channel. For this video, we're taking a look at how to layer additional sounds to strengthen your parts and why you might want to do this. Layering textures is actually something that has been in music for a long time. If you look at any kind of orchestral or classical music or film score and that sort of thing, you can see this actually done all the time in orchestral music. Melody lines that need to cut through the rest of the orchestra get strengthened by other instruments. Certain instruments are blended together to extend their harmonic range, their timbral range, their frequency range. These are common techniques that are done acoustically as well as in the box, in the DAW. We're going to check out 3 ways that you can improve your music production by adding additional layers. 1, dynamics. 2, frequency range. And 3, creating your unique sounds. I recently wrote a track that was inspired by this action-adventure animated series. It shows off this layers technique quite well, so we're going to dive in now and check out these 3 aspects in this piece. Alright, so example 1 is dynamics. Layering a melody line, for example, can be quite an effective way of increasing its strength in the mix. As new things kind of come in and start overlapping other things, the melody that was really strong before can start to creep a little bit into the background, get lost a little bit under all of that new stuff. Let's check out this example. So if I solo up this section, I basically have a solo viola that takes the main melody throughout. There's a counter melody with a solo violin, and then the dizi, this Chinese flute, takes over and doubles the line. There's also a shakuhachi or Japanese flute and a solo voice that are playing additional sort of phrases or melodic melody. All of this together contributes to the main sort of melody that is being strengthened by this track, but it's also not the only thing that's playing this melody. There are some double ups and additional layers. In this second part of the song, it gets quite intense. It's probably the biggest moment of the track. So down here, as we scroll down, we can see additional guitar lines coming in, and these start to strengthen the main melody. Let's take a listen firstly to the solo violin and see what's going on and how the dizi joins it. And then let's take a look at the guitar parts and see how they gel together. So from this, you can hear that there's the main viola line. There's also a doubled up line from the violin, an octave above, and the dizi coming in as well to strengthen the whole thing. You've got 3 instruments playing together. Their combination of tones is what strengthens and pushes this melody forward. However, this section of the song also has a lot of guitars. It has a lot of heavy brass and woodwind and strings coming in. It's the big moment of the track. So it gets further strengthened by some lead guitar. Let's throw in the guitars now and let's see how this melody evolves over time. So of course you can hear some chugging guitars along there as well. That's giving you a little bit of an idea of what the chords are underneath. But you can hear how the guitar starts to be brought in at a lower octave, and then a second guitar doubles it an octave above when it's the big main melody section. This is a classic example of using layers to be able to strengthen the melody as the dynamics of the rest of the track starts to increase. Let's listen to it all in. So I do hope you enjoy the track. If you want to check it out, check out the description below. There's a link to my SoundCloud. But hopefully what you can see is that as the main elements increase, it's because the mix and bed of instruments underneath it is also increasing on top of that. We've got trumpets and trombones and heavy low brass and low strings coming in as the sort of bridge part arises. And then as it hits that main chorus of instruments, everything is in. There's swooshes and sound effects, everything's coming in. So we need to be able to still hear the melody. So it gets doubled up. as we go. It sort of terraces up, increasing the strength of the melody each time we add another layer to it. Okay, let's talk about number 2. Now we're talking about frequency. We're talking about the range that an instrument occupies on the frequency spectrum, from low rumbling bass up to high brittle top end, and all the mids in between. A great example of this might be, say, a percussion line, a dramatic heavy drum line that we want to hear coming through the mix nice and punchy. That can get lost if it doesn't have a good balance across the frequency spectrum. Let's take these taiko hits for example. These taiko hits are wonderful. They're beautiful bassy type tones, but they get a little bit lost. Let's have a listen. Have a wonderful deep resonance, but that top end just doesn't allow them to cut through the mix. If I remove the additional layers, you'll see what I mean. They just get lost. So instead what we have is some additional layers. First of all, I've got these box hits. This is actually a fantastic library from Fractal Sounds called Box Factory, I believe. Really awesome. It's just basically all these percussive sounds made out of cardboard boxes. The critical thing here is that it's adding a lot of top end detail. You can actually hear that they're making more regular hits as well. And you can hear the difference between the taiko drums and the box hits. The low boomy sort of sound disappears a little bit. You might need some headphones for that one if you weren't quite hearing what I'm talking about here. The final layer I added on top was some metallic hits. If you think about like classic cinematic sort of sci-fi like Terminator, those big anvils, they're very punchy, and they're punchy because they've got a lot of top end that cuts through the mix along with the low hits. This really adds the magic and solidifies everything together. This way, when we throw everything together, so hopefully through that example, you can hear the frequency range is a lot wider. There's a lot more top end detail from those metallic and box hits, and that's causing it to cut through the mix so much better. Even on those moments where the low toms aren't ringing out, you can still hear the top end detail cutting through. They sound like they're drums, and they should sound like they're drums. But what they're doing here is allowing us to be able to hear those hits more distinctively across a wider frequency range. All right, let's talk about the final one, number 3. This is about unique sounds and creating your own identity in your music. Often when we're writing music, we're using the same libraries as other people, we're using the same samples, the same instruments. A lot of what we're doing is repeatable by someone else. You have to work hard as a composer to develop your own voice. And that doesn't mean necessarily sound totally different from everybody else, but it does mean put your own little flavor on everything that you do. You'll have a unique way of approaching things, a unique perspective when you look on something for the first time. Use that to your advantage. For example, risers and fallers or downers or whatever you like to call them, they're a staple in modern music production. You hear them everywhere. They are in pop music and rock music or indie music, but also cinematic music, and all these swooshes add interest and transition into new sections of the track. This piece, for example, uses that quite a bit. It would be lovely to create, of course, unique risers that are our own that we can use in this sort of situation, or develop them from scratch for every new project. However, time is of the essence. Sometimes you just don't have enough time to create your own riser. Don't worry, there are plenty of libraries out there that specialize in risers or have risers and hits and downers and different things that you can do. However, if you use the same riser as everybody else, are you not a little bit boring? How is it your own voice if you've got the same sound as everybody else? Now, the conversation about how to develop your own voice and what you should do to develop it and is it necessary, that's a topic for another time. I'll give you a moment now to hit that subscribe button so you can pop back later when we discuss that. But for now, let's take a look at these risers and see what we can do with them. Okay, down here we've got just 3 risers and downers or hits. Let's have a listen to the first one, which is carrying most of the weight. This fire swoosh sort of sound. I think this one was from Native Instruments' Rise and Hit. It's also been partnered up with this other little swoosh. I can't remember where I've taken it from. It gives us a little bit of an airiness, a quality that wasn't quite there with the fiery swoosh. I've then paired both of these with a box boom from that box library I was talking about earlier. And all three of these elements together create a unique and individual sound, a combination that you've come up with in your studio. So it's a very simple way of bringing a little bit of a unique flavor to pre-described material. Things that otherwise would have sounded very similar to someone else's composition, you've actually taken the time to blend it a little bit and put your own flavor on it through layering. A great example of how far you can go with this is actually the beginning part of this. If we just listen to the risers, there are multiple risers from lots of different libraries in here. I took stuff from Heaviosity Symphonic Destructions, there's some Brahms in there, Rise and Hit, Native Instruments. There's some stuff in there from Keep Forest, their Devastator range. I think there's even some Output Rev in there, some of the reverse risers that they've got. All of it together creates a unique tone that's very individual to this piece. Not just this piece, but this moment in time. I could do it completely differently next time. So all of that working together to come to something very different than just something straight out of the box. So the biggest thing is that layers bring you the ability to compose with the mix in mind. You are no longer just thinking about the composition and how it sounds and what you can layer on top in order to make it sound bigger. You're actually now going to reach a point where you can start thinking about the mixing decisions. If a melody line doesn't sound like it's cutting through, is it because you've composed it so that the melody line is just buried under a huge heavy weight of brass and strings and other sort of cinematic hits? You will be quite surprised how consciously picking layers based on dynamics, based on frequency, and based on creating your own unique sound, you will be pleasantly surprised by just how much this transforms your music from this simple sort of consideration. Now you're thinking not just about creating a line of music and an accompaniment to go with it, but how that is actually supported, how you can hear it working together. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you have. Subscribe if you haven't. Otherwise, happy composing, and I will catch you next time.